The late debate is up in about 13 minutes from now. We've got plenty to talk about between now and then, though, with Peter Dutton, the leader of the opposition, the steel in the spine of the right side of politics here. And we certainly know that these conversations end up making news, often misquoted by the Prime Minister once he gets to question time. So let's see what he can do with this. Now, as you know, and we mentioned at the start of the show, cost of living, as always, a problem. A third of people in this country needing credit cards to manage their finances. A huge increase in the number of people who are reverse mortgaging their home to pay for things, and a total of $18 billion more that Australians are spending on exactly the same things that they were getting for less last year. A lot to talk about when it comes to the economy and a whole lot more with Peter Dutton, and especially the way the government responds to everything, which is empathy, 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 no action or responsibility.
Always the case that Labor finds themselves, in bad luck when they get into government, that the economy always turns and they're always subject to an international event like it never happens when the Liberals are in government. The fact is that when John Howard and Peter Costello were in government, they had to deal with all sorts of international issues and impacts, domestic downturns, and it's the economic policies that the government comes up with that they implement. I get a real sense of deja vu at the moment. I'm sorry to say it. It's got a real sense of sort of the 80s about the environment that we're moving into. Higher interest rates, the government just not having the ability to make decisions because none of the people on the front bench making these decisions have ever been in business or ever been in a job outside of the union movement or a Labor member of Parliament's office. So they're pulling all the wrong strings, and at a time when you want there to be less pressure on the Reserve Bank governor, this government's making decisions that are increasing inflation and therefore pushing up interest rates higher than they need to be. And in the 80s, it didn't end well. And I really worry for a lot of Australians over the course of the next 12 months or so, just what impact it'll have on them and their families.
Well, and about power as well. I mean, literally again today, Chris Bowen's out there feeling everyone's pain about the increases that are coming when it comes to power prices. But I'm pretty sure I saw the moment when they signed the document about 43, but more importantly, signed the document about more than 80% renewables. It's not good enough for them to empathise. It's their job to respond, isn't it?
Well, of course it is. A lot of people really put their faith and trust into Labor at the last election. Some people who voted for Labor for the first time or for the first time in a long time, believing that the Prime Minister had a plan, and the $275 has never been spoken about since the election, and yet he promised on 97 occasions that your power bill would come down by $275. It now turns out that they've changed their language to say, we didn't mean that. It just means that the power bill's not going to go up by as much as it otherwise would have. That's cold comfort. Everyone's happy with renewables if they can be firmed up. But if you don't like coal and you don't like gas, as the Labor Party point out, the lights go out because the solar panels don't work overnight time. And the rolling out of 28,000 kilometres of poles and wires across the nation it's that sort of thing that will drive your power prices up, and it's what Chris Bowen's proposing at the moment. And I just don't think people want to see further massive increases in their power prices, which is exactly what Labor's drafting up at the moment.
Yeah, it's not about climate change. It's about the denial of the cost of transition, which is, I know, something you've believed and we've talked about for the best part of 10 years here on the telly. And what about, as Matt Canavan showed just a bit earlier in the program, that Anthony Albanese has spent a lot of time, we saw him on the float there in India, and India's a very important partnership. He's done a whole bunch of speeches, but never mentioned the C word, coal, which is 70% of our exports to India. Does that surprise you?
No, of course it doesn't. I mean, it's like a scene out of Yes Minister, in the briefings that he's getting from the public servants. They're saying, well, Prime Minister, we're a massive exporter of coal to India. The exports underpin our economy in Australia, and India can't keep the lights on. They can't pull people out of poverty without our coal. But don't talk about it. Don't mention it. And it's just surreal. And the Prime Minister's trying to play to an inner city audience back in Australia, but I think more people, frankly, the penny's dropping, that the government's talking out of both sides of their mouth, and you've got Tanya Plibersek and Chris Bowen running around saying that coal and gas must finish tomorrow, and you've got somebody like Madeleine King, who comes from Western Australia, is out there saying, well, coal and gas is absolutely necessary to keep the lights on. So eventually they get caught out. And I think the Prime Minister's been pretty tricky in his language in India. And again, I think most common sense Australians can realise that the Prime Minister's trying to pull the wool over their eyes, but I think they're smarter than that.
Just finally on The Voice, the Sydney Morning Herald was leaked a potential negotiating point here that is apparently being worked on, which is to add even extra words to the words none of us have seen just yet about what we'll be voting on later in the year, making it absolutely explicit that Parliament remains the sole authority to make laws and also to be the one to deal with legal consequences of anything that might come out of The Voice. Is this sort of the move towards compromise, or does it further complicate things, what was being leaked today?
It's a really good question, Paul. I don't know what is going on here, because Australians are demanding the detail. They just want from the Prime Minister honesty, to be honest. They want him to lay out what it is they're asking the people to support. If you're changing the Constitution, that's a big deal. Not like legislation. If legislation can be amended, it can be supported, it can be knocked back, it can be built on, it can be dispensed with. If you put something into the Constitution, as your viewers well know, that is a very significant change. And so people are just saying to the Prime Minister, well, just be upfront and straight with us and give us the detail, and we'll make the decision about whether it's another layer of bureaucracy or if it's going to help Indigenous people. And so far they haven't given that detail. But I actually think it's quite remarkable that given the group that is most influential with the government in relation to The Voice and the way in which the question will be constructed, etc., has been dealing with the issue for months and months and months. They're going to deliver a final report Thursday of this week, and yet they're only given legal advice by the Solicitor General Friday of last week, after they've had months of deliberation. And not to get the legal advice, I just think it's quite remarkable. So I hope the Attorney General can explain that, but I don't see why you would withhold the information or the legal advice from that group when they're about to report. It's putting the cart before the horse, but a lot of what this government does is exactly that. And I think there are a lot of decisions they're making at the moment that aren't going to impact in a positive way in our country, particularly, as you point out, for those that are really staring down the barrel of lots of cost of living pressures over the course of this next year.